So last night, Suzanne and I were taking a minute to relax by watching a heavily promoted hot new show on television, which I will not name because it was purely awful, and it seems mean to identify it just to say that it was terrible. But suffice to say, it was my least favorite show so far this year about a giant sinkhole in Los Angeles. Anyway, we were watching this unnamed show on a streaming service on our computer, which periodically interrupts our viewing to show us commercials, a lot of commercials, and which we normally zone out on, like you do, right? We talk to each other about the show or our lives, we go get a snack or whatever. But last night, a new thing happened. This has never happened before. The streaming service interrupted our terrible program, not with an ad, but with a question and an offer, with a bargain. It said, you can watch 3 minutes of regular old commercials, or you can interact with just one ad for 30 seconds. Just one ad, 30 seconds, just interact with it. So Suzanne clicked on the second option, and lo and behold, we got an interactive ad for I don't even remember what, and it asked us to answer some questions about what we preferred, this or that thing. The bargain was a shorter time for commercials, but you have to pay attention during that time. And whatever they wanted to learn about us from that interaction, I'm sure they learned it. So this brings me to Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu was a semi-mythical Taoist sage who lived somewhere around 600 BCE, was a contemporary of Confucius. He's considered the author of the Tao Te Ching, which means the classic of way and virtue, one of the fundamental texts of the Taoist religion and Chinese culture. The Tao was written during a time of trouble and upheaval in ancient China, a time when it seemed like the social order was fraying and conflict was rising and things were just in general falling apart. Maybe that sounds familiar. And the Tao was written in part in response to this upheaval. And in that text, Lao Tzu wrote these famous words. You can mold clay into a vessel. It is the emptiness that makes it useful. Cut doors and windows from the walls of a house, but the ultimate use of the house will depend on that part where nothing exists. Therefore, something is shaped into what is. Its usefulness comes from what is not. Translation by Carrie Hone. Usefulness comes from what is not, according to Lao Tzu. The last 2 Sundays, we've been talking about economic growth and the American cult of productivity, which has been really, to a degree, a discussion about use and worth. What has value? What do we aim at in life? And the cult of productivity that we talked about identifies usefulness and worth with the creation of things and experiences, more things, more experiences. But Lao Tzu says, no, ultimately, it is emptiness which is useful, an emptiness to which we should aspire. He offers metaphors drawn precisely from our experience as consumers of these everyday things. What makes a jar valuable? The emptiness inside. What makes a home valuable? The empty space that we inhabit. What makes a window useful? The space cut out to make an opening, the part that is not there. But the Tao is not a treatise on consumer goods. It's a treatise on how to live, on virtue. So what does emptiness look like as a spiritual value, as a way of life, as a virtue? Well, in the context of Taoism, emptiness does not mean literal nothingness. Consider the mind. Our mind, by its nature, attends to things. As such, it is never empty. People who pursue meditation sometimes begin with the presupposition that if they are doing it right, the mind will empty of thoughts and will be kind of like a silent, blank nothingness. But we're never truly empty of thought or awareness. What we seek to empty ourselves of in Taoism is self-interested desire, is cravings, the need for things and distractions to fill the moment when we could be quiet with ourselves. Taoism understands emptiness as a form of contentment with our natural state of being. It means a state of peaceful receptivity. It means a mind that is not crowded with the demands of the ego or distracted by desires. And what is left when we empty ourself out this way? Ourself, for one, the universe, for another. Now, consumer capitalism sees in emptiness not virtue, but opportunity. To find something empty is to identify a space to be filled or a need to be satisfied, or in any event, an opportunity to sell something to someone. And in its old and familiar form, this looks like filling our homes and lives with stuff, right? With stuff, with piling up the empty spaces in our lives, with trinkets and consumables and appliances and conveniences and comforts and luxuries and objects of aesthetic appreciation and so many throw pillows, until our shelves groan and our closets spilleth over. But this is old school. That's old school. That's the consumer economy. Today we are faced with what Jenny Odell, the author of How to Do Nothing, calls the attention economy. Today we are faced with the attention economy, and the attention economy is equally opposed to emptiness. But what it seeks to fill with its offerings is our awareness, every moment of it. In the attention economy, it is our attention itself that is monetized and commodified. Whatever we pay attention to becomes a click or a like, and that translates into ad revenue for someone. The mind that is open, receptive, peaceful, not engaged, is not generating any ad revenue for anyone. The mind that is not actually watching the commercial, but is off generating and getting a snack, well, that's generating less ad revenue, I gather, than the mind that agreed to interact with the clicky little ad thing. The attention economy wants your mind always focused on content. One easy way to do this is with nonstop anxiety and outrage. It's not the only way to do it, it's an easy way to do it. Polarizing, provocative, fear-baiting content. The mavens of the attention economy don't care whether what triggers you is that someone somewhere is refusing to wear a mask in a department store, or someone else somewhere is teaching critical race theory in a public school. They don't care. They just want you triggered. In some ways, this is as old as the newspaper or earlier, right? Penny dreadfuls were dreadful for a reason. Shock sells, controversy sells. But the modern attention economy is omnipresent and instantaneous and ruthlessly, adaptively intelligent in capturing our attention in a way that we're not used to dealing with. And the interface itself is addictive by design. The pull to refresh generates a hit of dopamine in our brain. It's addictive by design. Now, I want to be clear. If I seem that I'm disapproving of this new attention economy, and I certainly have questions about it, I'm not making Luddite arguments against the internet or technology. I grew up with the internet when the internet was a magical playground of badly organized awesomeness. And it has gotten in some ways more awesome and in some ways more terrible. I'm not against online communities. I have relationships that are decades old with people I have never met in physical space whose real names I don't actually know. And those relationships are important to me. I'm not opposed to social media. I like cat memes as much as the next person. I love the endless creativity, the fast flow of information. I love the way the internet helps people with diverse interests connect. And sometimes making online connections helps people, especially young people, understand that they are not alone, that they are not standing alone on that empty plane, that there are other people like them. Those connections can be life-saving, literally life-saving. And this has been particularly true and particularly important for LGBTQ people and for non-neurotypical people, right? So I'm not knocking any of those things. And yet, I think recent whistleblower testimony about certain unnamed gigantic social media corporations and how they operate has only served to highlight what has been abundantly clear since 2016 and before, that something has gone very, very wrong with the way the spread of information has morphed into the attention economy. The attention economy is doing questionable things to our social fabric and to the health of our public discourse. A curious mind, a critical mind, a questioning mind, a searching mind, an actively engaged mind. These things are to some degree incompatible with a mind that is overloaded with a decontextualized barrage of trivia, misinformation, real news, celebrity news, hot takes, ads, and outrage fodder. You can shut the mind down and shut engaged community conversation down through the traditional tools of censorship, repression, government control, right? By banning and eliminating information. That's how they did it in the 20th century. But as Jenny Odell notes again in How to Do Nothing, quoting an activist this time, you can just as effectively shut down the mind and shut down community conversation by bombarding it with nonsense and banality, with so much information about matters great and small that serious engagement with things that actually matter becomes difficult, almost impossible. So emptiness in the age of the attention economy is almost an act of resistance. It is a refusal to be so filled to the brim with information that knowledge, let alone wisdom, becomes an impossibility. And there's a familiar Zen parable that speaks to this, right? You've probably heard this one. The traveler, a learned philosopher, journeys for many miles to enjoy a private audience with the old Zen teacher, so he can learn the wisdom of Zen straight from the master. So they sit down, and the learned traveler begins to ask the old teacher question after question. And each question is designed to demonstrate, in fact, his own knowledge and his own insightfulness. These are good questions. And the old master listens for a while, and then he says, let's have some tea. So he puts out the cups, and he pours tea into the traveler's cup. And when the tea reaches the brim, he keeps pouring. And the tea spills over the edge, and he keeps pouring, and the tea runs across the plate onto the table, and he keeps pouring, and finally the traveler can't help himself, and he says, teacher, no more will go in, the cup is full. And the teacher says, so it is with you. How can you learn about Zen when you know so many things? First, empty your cup. Would you like to learn more Zen? Your content will resume shortly. Help our advertisers by answering this question: which of the following brands have you seen online in the last 30 days? Emptiness creates space for newness, new thoughts, new experiences, new wisdom. It creates space for creativity. It creates space for growth. We would do well to cultivate open spaces in our lives and unclaimed time. This is what the ancient practice of the Sabbath is about, maintaining an open time for rest, for renewal, for reflection as a spiritual practice. Maintaining a time that resists the demand to be productive, to be of use. And Sabbath isn't just for workers. People of any age, any occupation, or no occupation at all can have overfull lives. There are as many ways to fill up our lives as we can dream up. I often say the busiest person I know is a retired Unitarian. It's good to have a full life. There's a reason we wish each other a full life as a blessing, or say with satisfaction and gratitude, I've lived a full life. And it is necessary to have emptiness too. Fullness and emptiness at best, at optimum, should exist in a balance or as a dance. We leave space in our life even as we fill it up. Now, the reality is we do not always achieve this balance, and it is not always in our control anyway, right? Sometimes life is overfull, and that is just how it is. Overfull with opportunities or responsibilities or stimulation, and we may experience this as exciting or joyful or energizing or anxiety-provoking or overwhelming or all of the above. Sometimes it's just too much. And then sometimes life empties us out. We can talk about emptiness as something we cultivate or something we practice or a choice we make or a virtue, and then sometimes life empties us out all on its own, and that is an entirely different experience. Gina, in her reflection today, shared an experience of being emptied out by life, of being overwhelmed by those compounding losses. And life is not meant ultimately to be empty in that way, to be empty of meaning, of purpose, of connection, of hope. And the cruelty of our cult of productivity is that precisely in those moments of emptiness when we are most in need of others, and we all experience these moments at some time in our life, that is when we are encouraged to mask, to pretend to be okay, not to ask for help, to keep doing all the things, to show, no, look, it's okay, I can keep doing all the things. And if that is you today, it is okay to not be able to do all the things. It's okay to need help. It's okay to ask for help. Now, paradoxically, emptiness or emptying out can also be the beginning of healing. In our story for all ages, the protagonist explores the use of crying, coming up again against that question of what is useful, what is productive, what is going to deal with this problem, right? Crying, wailing, lamenting, however we express our grief or sadness, is like an emptying out. It's like an emptying out. And that emptying out is often the beginning of healing. Someone who's left a long relationship that no longer serves may have the experience like of throwing out or even burning items associated with that relationship, symbolically emptying themselves out of that experience, making space for newness and healing. Telling the truth about abuse or mistreatment or oppression, naming it, can be an emptying out, a letting go of shame that we've internalized and carried that was never ours to hold on to. And that can be the beginning of healing. And note, it may be advisable to do this with the help of a skilled therapist or a counselor, particularly if there's trauma involved. And I want to say for women in particular, naming anger can be the beginning of emptying out of toxic stress held too long in the body. It's almost a taboo act for women to be angry, especially in the workforce. And for women of color, it's even more taboo and carries even greater risks, right? Women who name their anger risk being called, I'll say strident or shrill as the most polite word I can use in church. You know the actual word. People of color risk playing into stereotypes like the angry black person. LGBTQ people risk playing into stereotypes about being dramatic or unstable. Right, so creating a safe context in which to name and empty out our anger can be healing. And people who've experienced oppression have a lot to be angry about. This is one of the values of identity-based caucus groups, which are becoming more common these days. They create a safe space to name the anger born of the experience of oppression, which is otherwise risky to name. They create a safe space for emptying out, which is the beginning of healing. Emptiness or emptying out can create space for learning and growth. It creates space for healing. It can also lead us back into a truer story of who we are. This is the last thing I want to talk about today. Just like our homes can get cluttered with things and our minds can get cluttered with trivia, our soul can get cluttered with stories. The stories we tell ourselves about who we are and the stories we let other people tell us about who we are. And these stories often serve as a framework around which we organize our lives and even understand our meaning and purpose, right? These stories that become our identity. And whether these stories are precious or painful or both, we're reluctant to let them go. And when life empties us out of one of our defining stories, our identity, it is often painful. It feels like an emptiness. And it is also an invitation. So, for example, maybe we are used to identifying as the provider and we lose our job. Or worse, we lose our ability to do work. Maybe we identify primarily as a parent and we are now empty nesters. Maybe we have always identified as the caregiver and suddenly it is we who need care because of an illness or an accident or age. When we lose that identity that has served as our central story, we're left feeling uniquely empty. But this emptiness invites us to craft a new story and a larger story. For the story of who we are is always larger than whatever story we are currently telling about ourselves. So this kind of emptiness is an invitation to step back into the larger story that says our first name, the name we were born with, is beloved. And the name we will carry with us when we pass into mystery is beloved. And our job as members of specifically religious community, one rooted in a universalist tradition that says all people are worthy of love, regardless of identity, regardless of role, irrespective of productive capacity or net worth or our usefulness to other people, that says all people are worthy of love, the end. All people are named beloved. And so our first job is to remind one another of this, our true name. And when we're emptied out in this way, it's an opportunity to return to that larger story. Because our true name is not worker or student or parent or citizen or troublemaker or helper or genius or the bad son or failure. Our true name is beloved. So let us for the moment be emptied of cravings, emptied of news alerts, emptied of strivings, emptied of our favorite stories of who we are. What remains? Who we are and the universe. Beloved and beloved. Perfectly enough. Blessed be and amen.